The periscope breaks the surface of the Atlantic. Through the narrow eyepiece, Captain Lieutenant Otto Steinbrink watches a British merchant vessel plowing through the waves 800 meters distant. It's April 27, 1917. His hand moves to the torpedo-firing lever, but something is wrong. The ship ahead appears to be traveling in 3 directions at once. Massive geometric shapes, black triangles slashing across white zigzags, blue curves intersecting crimson stripes, fracture the vessel's outline into impossible angles. Steinbrink squints, recalculating. Is the bow pointing northeast or southwest? Is that the stern or a false shadow? He's been hunting Allied shipping for 18 months, but he's never seen anything like this. Range? He barks to his executive officer. 700 meters, Capitan. No, wait. 800? The angles. Steinbrink's finger hesitates on the firing mechanism. A torpedo costs 40,000 Reichsmarks. Miss, and the flash will reveal his position to the destroyer escorts he knows are prowling nearby. The ship's speed seems impossibly slow. 8 knots. 12? 15? Its heading equally uncertain. He needs a 90-degree intercept angle for a clean kill. But which direction is it actually moving? 10 seconds pass. 20. The merchant vessel slides beyond optimal firing range. Steinbrink slams his palm against the periscope housing. Another target lost. What Steinbrink didn't know was that he'd just encountered HMS Alsatian, the first Royal Navy vessel painted in what would become the most controversial camouflage scheme in naval history. And the mind behind those bewildering patterns wasn't a naval officer, wasn't a military strategist, wasn't even a scientist. He was a 49-year-old maritime painter who'd spent his career creating picturesque seascapes for railway posters. A man with 0 credentials in military camouflage, optics, or submarine warfare. By April 1917, German U-boats were winning the war. They'd sunk 430 Allied ships in that month alone, 852,000 tons of vital supplies sent to the ocean floor. Britain was 8 weeks from starvation. Every conventional solution had failed. Convoys helped, but not enough. Traditional camouflage, grays and blues to hide ships, proved worthless against periscope, equipped submarines that attacked from point-blank range. What Norman Wilkinson proposed would violate every principle of concealment warfare. His idea would make British ships more visible, not less. Naval experts would call it insane, but this commercial artist was about to change naval warfare forever with a concept so radical that a century later, it's still inspiring military camouflage research. The numbers in early 1917 painted a terrifying picture. German U-boats operated with near impunity beneath the Atlantic waves. In February alone, they destroyed 540,000 tons of Allied shipping. March brought 564,000 tons to the bottom. Then came April, the month British naval historians would call Black April, when 430 ships totaling 852,000 tons were torpedoed. At that rate of loss, Britain's food reserves would run dry by June. The island nation faced a choice: surrender or starve. The Admiralty had tried everything. They'd painted ships in monochromatic blues and grays, attempting to blend vessels into the ocean and sky. The camouflage worked beautifully from the air, but German submarines attacked from sea level through periscopes, where gray ships stood out in perfect silhouette against the horizon. The paint schemes became floating bullseyes. Naval architects proposed false bows, wooden structures mounted on sterns to confuse attackers about a ship's direction. U-boat commanders adapted within weeks, learning to identify the real propeller wash. Engineers suggested smoke generators to create concealing fog banks. The smoke revealed ships' positions to submarines miles away while blinding friendly escort vessels. Some captains tried zigzag evasion patterns, but the maneuvers reduced cargo capacity and exhausted coal supplies without significantly reducing torpedo strikes. The core problem was mathematical. German submarine commanders used sophisticated analog computers built into their periscopes, precision instruments that calculated firing solutions based on target speed, heading, and range. When a U-boat captain identified these 3 variables, his torpedo's gyroscopic guidance system could predict where the target would be 30 seconds later. The torpedo didn't need to be aimed at the ship. It needed to be aimed at empty water where the ship would inevitably sail. British naval intelligence had captured U-boat periscope equipment and studied the firing calculations. The conclusion was stark. Once a submarine commander locked in accurate readings for speed, course, and distance, the torpedo's hit probability exceeded 60%. Traditional camouflage couldn't prevent this. Ships couldn't become invisible at 400-meter range on the open ocean. Gray paint might delay detection by 30 seconds, but U-boats typically shadowed targets for minutes before firing, plenty of time to establish firing solutions. The expert consensus was grim. Sir John Jellicoe, First Sea Lord of the Admiralty, testified before the War Cabinet in February 1917 that merchant ship losses would exceed construction capacity by summer. There is no solution to the submarine problem, he admitted. We cannot protect every merchant vessel. We cannot detect submerged U-boats reliably. We cannot prevent torpedo attacks. The best hope was introducing convoy systems, grouping merchant ships with destroyer escorts, but even this barely slowed the slaughter. What the Admiralty needed was revolutionary. Something that didn't hide ships but broke the periscope targeting system itself. Something that would corrupt the U-boat commander's calculations, turn his precision instruments into sources of confusion, make every firing solution suspect. But the Admiralty's naval architects, its submarine warfare specialists, its camouflage committees staffed with trained military engineers, none of them saw the answer. The breakthrough would come from outside the naval establishment entirely. It would emerge not from the Admiralty building in Whitehall, not from the Royal Naval College, not from any military research laboratory. It would come during a train journey from Portsmouth to London, in the mind of a civilian artist who spent his days painting steamships for tourist advertisements, a man who joined the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve at age 39, despite having no naval background whatsoever. Norman Wilkinson was about to have an insight that would save thousands of lives. But first, he'd have to convince the most tradition-bound military institution in Britain that sometimes the best defense isn't hiding. It's being seen in the most confusing way possible. Norman Wilkinson possessed exactly 0 qualifications for revolutionizing naval warfare. Born in Cambridge in 1878, he'd attended Berkhamsted School of Art, not the Royal Naval Academy, at Dartmouth. His professional career consisted of painting watercolors for railway companies and maritime scenes for the Illustrated London News. He specialized in making ocean liners look romantic and seascapes appear tranquil. His clients wanted pretty pictures that sold train tickets to coastal resorts. When World War I erupted in 1914, Wilkinson was 36 years old, far too old for combat service, but the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve accepted him for auxiliary patrol duty. They needed warm bodies to scan for periscopes from patrol vessels. It was unglamorous work. Wilkinson spent his watches staring at empty ocean, an artist conscripted to do nothing artistic whatsoever. By April 1917, he'd transferred to HMS Argus, a patrol vessel operating from Portsmouth. The work was mind-numbing and terrifying in equal measure. German U-boats prowled the English Channel with increasing boldness. Wilkinson watched helplessly as ships he'd known, vessels he'd painted in happier times, returned to port with torpedo damage, or didn't return at all. The casualty reports mounted. 8 merchant sailors drowned here, 42 there. An entire crew of 76 sent to the bottom in minutes. On a morning train journey from Portsmouth to London, Wilkinson stared through the window as the Hampshire countryside rolled past. His mind churned with the problem everyone in the Royal Navy obsessed over. How do you stop a submarine from sinking your ship? His artist eye studied the passing landscape. Trees, hedgerows, fence posts, creating overlapping visual patterns as the train moved. His thoughts drifted to his pre-war work, to the challenge of conveying 3-dimensional ships on 2-dimensional canvases, to the optical tricks artists used to suggest motion and direction. Then the insight struck with physical force. He later recalled the moment in his unpublished memoir. I suddenly got the idea that since it was impossible to paint a ship so that she could not be seen by a submarine, the extreme opposite was the answer, to paint her, not for low visibility. but in such a way as to break up her form and thus confuse a submarine officer as to the course on which she was heading. It was counterintuitive, backwards, completely opposed to every camouflage principle. But Wilkinson recognized something the naval experts had missed. Submarines didn't need to see ships. They needed to understand them. They needed accurate data about speed, heading, and range. What if you painted a ship so that observers could see it clearly but couldn't comprehend what they were seeing? What if you turned the ship itself into a visual eye? The train pulled into Waterloo Station. Wilkinson gathered his papers and stepped onto the platform. In his mind, geometric shapes already danced across imaginary hulls, intersecting diagonals, false perspectives, curves suggesting phantom bows. He had no authority, no budget, no supporters, but he had the sketch of an idea that would either save thousands of lives or end his naval career in humiliation. What he needed next was permission to prove his radical theory. And that meant walking into the Admiralty building and asking Britain's most tradition-bound officers to trust an artist with no military expertise whatsoever. The Admiralty officers stared at Wilkinson's sketches as if he'd presented them with abstract art, which, in a sense, he had. Bold geometric shapes, clashing colors, diagonal stripes intersecting at impossible angles. One captain squinted at a drawing, turned it sideways, then upside down. I can't even tell which end is the bow. Exactly, Wilkinson said quietly. This is ridiculous, another officer interjected. Camouflage is supposed to conceal. You're proposing we paint ships like circus wagons. Every U-boat in the Atlantic will spot them from miles away. Wilkinson explained his theory with an artist's patience. German submarines didn't sink ships by seeing them. They sank them by calculating them. The periscope's range-finding mechanism, the commander's mental triangulation of speed and heading, the torpedo's predicted intercept point, all of this depended on accurate visual information. If we can corrupt that information, Wilkinson argued, we don't need to hide the ship. We need to make the ship tell lies. The room erupted. Naval architects insisted such painting would achieve nothing. Submarine warfare specialists declared it a waste of resources. One commander called it the most absurd proposal I've encountered in 30 years of service. Several officers questioned whether Wilkinson understood basic military principles. He was an artist. What did he know about torpedo ballistics or periscope optics? But Rear Admiral Alexander Duff, newly appointed director of the Anti-Submarine Division, saw something others missed. The conventional approaches were failing. Britain was losing the war. Duff authorized Wilkinson to proceed, not with full fleet implementation, but with a trial. One ship, one design, prove it works or drop it forever. Wilkinson was given a dusty studio at Royal Academy Burlington House in Piccadilly. No budget, no staff, just space to work. He began crafting small ship models from wood, each no more than 8 inches long. He painted them with his radical patterns, one side of each model different from the other, then mounted them on a rotating table. To simulate the submarine commander's view, he acquired a genuine German periscope captured from U-34. He'd peer through the periscope at the tiny painted ships, trying to determine their heading and speed as they moved past a rotating background painted to match Atlantic conditions. The results shocked him. Even though he'd designed the patterns and knew the model's true orientations, the visual confusion was profound. His brain insisted a ship was heading northeast when the model actually faced southwest. Apparent speed fluctuated wildly. His eyes fought his knowledge. In May 1917, the first test vessel was ready. Camouflage Industry, a small supply ship. Wilkinson's team spent 3 days painting it in wild diagonal patterns, black triangles, white curves, blue and white stripes creating false waves and phantom shadows. When Industry departed Portsmouth Harbor on its maiden voyage, Coast Guards and patrol vessels reported the ship to headquarters as an unknown, potentially hostile vessel. Their own side couldn't recognize it. That is exactly the point, Wilkinson said when he heard. The confusion had begun. Word of HMS Industry's bizarre paint scheme spread through the Royal Navy like wildfire. Reactions ranged from mockery to outrage. Seasoned captains called it undignified. Naval architects declared it scientifically unsound. Submarine commanders questioned whether Wilkinson understood torpedo mechanics. One admiral reportedly said, We're fighting the Kaiser, not performing in a music hall. Wilkinson requested a formal evaluation before the Admiralty's Camouflage Committee. The meeting convened in June 1917 at the Admiralty Building in Whitehall. Present were decorated naval officers, marine engineers, submarine warfare experts, men with decades of combined military experience, and Norman Wilkinson, commercial artist, clutching his painted wooden models. The committee members examined the models with barely concealed skepticism. Captain James Henderson, a submarine commander with 12 kills to his credit, spoke first. Mr. Wilkinson, with respect, this appears to be artistic experimentation rather than practical defensive strategy. Camouflage operates on concealment principles. Your proposal achieves the opposite, maximum visibility. Wilkinson set a model on the table. May I demonstrate? He produced the captured German periscope. Please look through this. Tell me the heading of that vessel. Henderson peered through the eyepiece at the model positioned 15 feet away against a painted Atlantic backdrop. Several seconds passed. The bow appears to be facing left. Northwest heading. No, wait. That shadow suggests the stern is The bow is facing directly away from you, Wilkinson said quietly. Due south. The room fell silent. Henderson looked again, his expression shifting from certainty to confusion. That can't be correct. Try this model, Wilkinson said, rotating a different ship into view. Estimate its speed if it's crossing your field of view. Henderson watched the slowly rotating model. Perhaps 8 knots? No, faster, 12 knots. The model is stationary, Wilkinson said, rotating at constant speed, but the pattern creates motion illusion. Commander Algernon, Willis leaned forward. This is a parlor trick with wooden toys. What evidence suggests it works against actual submarines in combat conditions? Shoes Industry has completed 47 supply runs to France, Wilkinson reported, operating in waters where U-boat attacks are routine. 0 torpedo strikes. We've received intercepted wireless traffic indicating U-boat commanders reporting target identification difficulties in Industry's operational area. He paused. Additionally, 3 patrol vessels have reported Industry to headquarters as an unknown vessel requiring investigation, despite knowing it was scheduled to pass their stations. If our own observers can't reliably identify it, neither can enemy submariners. The room erupted. Officers spoke over each other. 47 runs proves nothing. Sample size too small. Coincidental. Underwater conditions differ from surface observation. Admiral Duff raised his hand for silence. Gentlemen, let me clarify our situation. We are currently losing. This war... April saw 852,000 tons of shipping destroyed. May was little better. Every conventional defensive measure has failed to significantly reduce U-boat effectiveness. Mr. Wilkinson proposes something we haven't tried. He fixed the committee with a hard stare. Can anyone in this room present data showing this approach will definitively fail? No one spoke. The evidence of failure was absent because the approach was unprecedented. Then we proceed, Duff declared. I'm authorizing full-scale implementation. Mr. Wilkinson, you'll establish a Dazzle painting section, design schemes for merchant vessels and naval ships, train artists to create the patterns. We'll begin with 50 troop ships, our highest value targets. Commander Willis protested, Sir, with respect, we're trusting national defense to an untested theory from a civilian painter. We're trusting national defense to mathematics, Duff interrupted. U-boat commanders calculate firing solutions using visual data. Mr. Wilkinson proposes corrupting that data. The physics are sound even if the method is unorthodox. He turned to Wilkinson. You'll work from Burlington House. Recruit artists who understand perspective and visual perception. I want designs for our first 50 ships within 3 weeks. As the meeting dispersed, officers muttered their doubts, but Duff's word was final. Wilkinson left the Admiralty building with unprecedented authority, transformed the Royal Navy's appearance from traditional naval gray to geometric chaos. If you're enjoying this story of an outsider whose radical thinking changed everything, hit subscribe, because we're just getting to the part where U-boat commanders start missing shots they should never miss. The art of confusion was about to become military doctrine. The Dazzle section at Royal Academy Burlington House became one of World War I's strangest military operations. Wilkinson assembled a team not of naval officers, but of artists, illustrators, and stage designers, people who understood visual perception, forced perspective, and optical illusion. Women from the Royal Academy joined men unfit for combat service. Together, they hunched over tables covered with tiny wooden ship models, paintbrushes creating geometric chaos on miniature hulls. Each design was unique. Wilkinson insisted on this. If U-boat commanders learned to recognize patterns, the system would fail. So every ship received a custom scheme tailored to its hull shape and operational profile. Destroyers got different patterns than cargo ships. Tankers received designs unlike troop ships. The only consistency was radical inconsistency. By August 1917, HMS Alsatian, the former ocean liner, converted to armed merchant cruiser, received her Dazzle paint, massive angular shapes in black, white, blue, and gray creating false perspective and phantom structures. Curved lines suggested bows where sterns existed. White triangles implied shadow depth where flat surfaces stretched. When she departed Liverpool on August 15, 1917 for Atlantic patrol duty, she looked like a cubist painting somehow made seaworthy. The testing data began arriving within weeks, and it was strange. Dazzle ships were slightly more visible than traditionally camouflaged vessels. Visibility increased approximately 3%. U-boat log entries mentioned Dazzle ships being spotted at marginally greater distances. Critics pounced on this as proof of failure. But the sinking statistics told a different story of Dazzle-painted ships sailing through U-boat-infested waters between August and December 1917. 1.47% were attacked. Of non-dazzled ships in the same waters, 1.12% were attacked. The increased visibility seemed to translate to more attack attempts. But here's where the data became fascinating. Successful torpedo strikes showed dramatic difference. When U-boats fired at Dazzle ships, the hit rate dropped to 41%, down from 62% against conventional vessels. More revealing still, of ships that were hit by torpedoes, 43% of Dazzle ships sank compared to 54% of uncamouflaged ships. The Dazzle patterns seemed to influence where torpedoes struck. Instead of hitting critical amidships sections, the perfect kill zone, torpedoes struck Dazzle ships more randomly. 41% of Dazzle ships were hit amidships versus 52% of regular ships. The visual confusion apparently affected aim even in successful attacks. The combat test came on September 14, 1917. The troop ship RMS Olympic, sister ship to the ill-fated Titanic, was carrying 4,700 American soldiers to France. She'd been freshly painted in elaborate Dazzle featuring false perspective that made her appear to be sailing sideways. At 7:20 a.m. in the Celtic Sea, U-103, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Klaus Rucker, spotted her at 700 meters range. Rucker's war log, captured after the war, described his confusion. Target observed, large four-funnel passenger liner, high value. Attempted range and course calculation. Ship's heading uncertain. Bow structures suggest course 285 degrees, but wake indicates 310 degrees. Speed estimate difficult, between 14 and 22 knots. Extreme size variance apparent, possibly due to zigzag maneuver. Olympic was actually traveling at 18 knots on heading 295 degrees, neither zigzagging nor varying speed. But Rucker saw contradictions everywhere. The false perspective painted on Olympic's hull suggested impossible geometries. Rucker fired a single torpedo based on his best calculation. The torpedo passed 90 meters behind Olympic's stern, a complete miss at close range. Before he could fire again, Olympic's destroyer escort, Fuzz Morsum, detected U-103's periscope and charged. Rucker crashed Dove and lost contact. 4,700 American soldiers reached France safely. Many of their descendants would never know they owed their existence to an artist's geometric patterns. The evidence accumulated through late 1917. The Admiralty's statistical analysis revealed patterns that even skeptics couldn't dismiss. A captured German U-boat officer, interrogated after his submarine was depth-charged in November 1917, spoke candidly about Dazzle's impact. The painted ships are very difficult to attack. Through the periscope, the heading appears one direction, but the actual course is different. By the time we recalculate, the target position has changed. It increases firing solution time by 30 to 40 seconds, enough for the target to move beyond optimal range. 30 to 40 seconds doesn't sound dramatic, but in submarine warfare, it was everything. Yeah. U-boats typically operated at periscope depth for 2 to 3 minutes during attack runs. Any longer, and destroyer escorts might detect their position. In those precious minutes, commanders needed to identify targets, calculate firing solutions, and launch torpedoes. Dazzle painting added a cognitive burden that consumed time the submarines couldn't afford. By October 1917, Admiral Duff ordered mass production. The Dazzle section expanded to 50 personnel working around the clock. They produced 300 unique designs in 3 months. Merchant ships, troop carriers, destroyers, cruisers, all received their geometric war paint. American ships joined the program after U.S. entry into the war. USS Leviathan, the massive troop ship carrying doughboys to France, received one of the most elaborate schemes, sweeping curves and angular disruptions that made the 54,000-ton vessel appear to constantly change direction. The statistics for 1918 told the final story. Of 2,300 Dazzle-painted British merchant ships operating in U-boat waters, sinking rates declined while cargo delivered increased. The U-boat campaign that had nearly starved Britain into submission in early 1917 failed to achieve its goals in 1918. Multiple factors contributed: convoy systems, improved depth charges, increased destroyer escorts, but Dazzle painting corrupted the targeting precision U-boats depended upon. This story of creative problem-solving in desperate times continues, but first, take a moment to like this video and check out our sponsor, who makes staying informed about history easier than ever. Link in the description. Norman Wilkinson's geometric chaos had achieved something traditional military thinking couldn't. It turned visibility into a weapon. Ships couldn't hide on the open ocean, but they could lie. And those lies saved lives. By November 1918, when the armistice ended the Great War, over 4,000 British merchant ships and 400 naval vessels wore Dazzle camouflage. The exact number of lives saved is impossible to calculate. You can't count people who didn't die. But the statistical probability suggests thousands of sailors and soldiers reached port safely who otherwise would have drowned in the cold Atlantic. And it all started because one artist looked at the problem differently than everyone else. After the armistice on November 11, 1918, Norman Wilkinson returned to civilian life with characteristic modesty. He resumed painting maritime scenes and railway posters, the same work he'd done before revolutionizing naval warfare. He never wrote a memoir for publication. He rarely gave interviews about Dazzle camouflage. When pressed, he'd say simply, "I had an idea. Others made it work." The Royal Navy recognized his contribution with the rank of lieutenant commander and later appointed him honorable marine painter to the Royal Yacht Squadron. He was made commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1948, but he remained fundamentally uncomfortable with fame. Colleagues noted he'd changed the subject when conversation turned to his wartime work. He preferred discussing watercolor techniques or the proper way to paint ocean waves. The U-boat commanders who'd struggled against Dazzle offered their own retrospective. In post-war interviews, several German submariners confirmed the targeting difficulties. One former captain wrote in 1923, "The Dazzle-painted ships were our greatest frustration. You could see them clearly, which made the challenge worse. You knew the target was there, but your instruments seemed to contradict your eyes. It was like fighting an optical illusion." Dazzle camouflage saw limited use in World War II. Radar and aerial reconnaissance reduced its effectiveness. Electronic targeting didn't care about optical confusion, but the core concept persisted. Modern naval camouflage still uses disruptive patterns to confuse range-finding, though more subtly than Wilkinson's bold geometric schemes. Some military analysts suggest Dazzle principles might counter computer vision systems used by autonomous weapons, creating modern relevance for a century-old idea. The numbers remain the strongest testament. Of those 4,000-plus Dazzle ships, Operating through 1917-1918, the reduced sinking rates translated to an estimated 2,000–3,000 additional merchant sailors surviving the war, plus thousands of soldiers who reached Europe safely aboard Dazzle-painted troop ships. These aren't abstract statistics. They're grandfathers who came home, families that weren't destroyed, lives that continued. In 1963, at age 85, Wilkinson retired as president of the Royal Institute of Painters and Watercolors, a position he'd held for 27 years. He died on May 30, 1971, at age 92. His obituaries mentioned Dazzle Camouflage, but mostly discussed his landscape paintings and poster art. He would have preferred it that way. The real lesson of Norman Wilkinson's story isn't about naval warfare or camouflage techniques. It's about the power of looking at problems from outside conventional frameworks. The Admiralty's trained submarine specialists, naval architects, and military strategists all approached the U-boat threat with traditional military thinking: hide the ships, improve detection, increase firepower. They sought solutions within established paradigms. Wilkinson, the outsider with artist's eyes, saw the problem differently. He recognized that submarine targeting depended on perception, and that perception could be manipulated. His lack of formal military training wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. He wasn't constrained by how things were supposed to work. Sometimes the person who solves an impossible problem is the person who doesn't know it's impossible. Norman Wilkinson didn't set out to change naval warfare. He just saw ships differently than everyone else, and that different perspective saved thousands of lives. The geometric chaos he painted on British hulls proved a fundamental truth. In war, as in art, the most powerful weapon isn't always the biggest or the fastest. Sometimes it's simply seeing the problem in a way no one else can.